All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's program on the topic of understanding applying for Social Security Disability, SSDI. Some of you may recognize our presenters from Liner Legal. They have done this webinar for us a couple of times. I think maybe this is our third time doing this in the last 3 or 4 years. Obviously, this is an important topic that many of you have questions about, so there will be a lot of time for questions in the next hour. And as you noted, we are recording this, so it will be uploaded to the NAMI Greater Cleveland YouTube channel later this week. Many of you have been attending these webinars that we offer on a monthly basis quite regularly. I recognize many of your names. If you're newer or this is your first webinar, so we are NAMI Greater Cleveland. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and our mission is dedicated to improving quality of life for individuals living with mental illness and their family members. We do that by providing programming in the areas of support, education, information and referral, and advocacy. You will receive a copy of these slides in a follow-up email after the webinar. Please do remember to remain muted unless otherwise speaking so we can limit background noise. Please utilize the chat feature if you have questions. I will be monitoring the chat throughout this presentation. And please do stick around before we wrap up, as I will be including a link to a brief anonymous survey about this presentation. We appreciate your honest feedback on that. With that being said, I think I'll let Michael and Jordan introduce themselves and get us started. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Matt. Am I on screen? Am I visible to everybody at this point? All right,
Yep,
I'm
yes.
getting that head nod confirmation. First of all, I want to thank Matt and Nami for welcoming us back for, I think he's right, maybe the third or fourth time that we've done this over the last couple years. My name is Michael Liner, and I am the founder of Liner Legal, a law firm based right here in Cleveland, Ohio, even though we do have a nationwide practice, but we are based here in Cleveland. And exclusively what we do is help people through the disability process. And I am pleased to be able to have with me Jordan Paratori on this. Jordan, do you want to introduce yourself and share what your role, your unique role is in our office? And then I'm sure we'll come back to that more later because it's kind of a part of our presentation.
Yes, I'd love to. Hi, everybody. Thank you again for having us. It's nice to see so many that have joined today. So, my name is Jordan. As Michael said, I have a very unique role at the firm. My role is the client concierge. And so, what I do is I assist our current clients with finding community resources while we work on their case. I can assist them with finding food pantries in their area, utility assistance programs, any sort of bill assistance that just might help them get by through this pretty long process, which I'm sure Michael will share more about that in detail. But we added this service about 5 years ago just to help our clients in other ways other than just their disability case. And I'll share more in detail about what I can assist with later in the presentation.
Yeah. And so the purpose of this presentation, at least at the outset, is more to kind of meet people where we're going to kind of give a bird's eye overview of the disability programs, what Social Security is looking for, um, and really, what I want to do, because I know that everybody has different questions and concerns about this process, we're going to, as Matt said, leave plenty of time at the end to answer your questions so that we can make it most relevant to you, because there's all different experience levels and interest in engaging with the Social Security process. So we're going to kind of give some general information, and then we're going to try and tailor it to you at the end with the questions that we leave time for. So, without any further ado, Jordan, you kind of want to get us moving through the slide here. What is Social Security disability? And you can rotate us one more time. At a very high level, Social Security disability, it's a government benefit for individuals who are unable to work. And there's three separate parts of this definition. I'm gonna read this, but then I'm gonna kind of go off the screen here a little bit and explain it in more depth. But it's a government benefit for individuals who are unable to engage in any substantial gainful activity That's the first prong. By reason of any medically determinable physical or mental impairment. That's the second prong, which can be expected to result in death or which has lasted or can be expected to last for a continuous period of not less than 12 months. Let's first start by just putting this in layman's terms. Social Security disability is a government benefit for people who can't work. Um, but there's a more technical definition because in order to receive Social Security disability, you don't necessarily have to be completely unable to work. You can still work part-time while still applying for or receiving disability benefits. But what there is there's an earnings cap, and that's called substantial gainful activity. It's not a number of hours, it's an amount of money. So the most amount of money that somebody can work and earn in a month while applying for or receiving Social Security disability benefits is $1,620. If you are earning more than that per month, now that's a gross amount before any deductions like taxes or health insurance or anything comes out. It's not your net, it's not your take home, it's your gross. But if you are earning above that 1620 per month amount, Social Security will automatically find that you are not disabled. It does not matter if you earn that amount in by working 30 hours per week or if you earn that amount in 1 hour per month. I mean, envision there are some really high paying professions where if somebody just works, for a couple hours a month, they could earn more than $1,620. What Social Security is looking at is an amount of money. If you exceed that, then you are not disabled. There are some exceptions that they don't apply so generally, and so I'm not going to talk about them here. But of course, this kind of goes to the questions. If people have questions that pertain to you or someone who you love or a client of yours that relates to one of those exceptions, feel free to ask me at the end and I can try and tailor this. But SGA is an amount of money a maximum amount of money that somebody can earn every month. That's the first part of this definition. Now, next, by reason of any medically determinable physical or mental impairment. Okay. And what that means is that you can get disability for any type of health issue that you might have, whether it's a physical health issue. Of course, we're here today as a part of NAMI, so mental health is included. It does not matter if it is a bipolar disorder, a schizophrenic disorder, a depressive disorder, whatever it is across the entire spectrum of health. If you have a health challenge that is keeping you from being able to work, then you may qualify for these benefits. But, and this is important because I think I really want to make sure that people understand the level of evidence that it takes to be successful with a Social Security disability case. You can't get disability just for a symptom. You can get disability because of like it says in here, medically determinable impairment. So what I mean by that is you can't get disability because you're depressed. You can get disability because you have a depressive disorder. Those aren't the same things. Obviously, feelings of depression, sadness, loneliness, there's several different things that go towards a valid diagnosis of a major depressive disorder or any type of depressive disorder. Um, but just feelings of being depressed in and of itself cannot qualify for Social Security. You need to have a valid diagnosis from an acceptable medical provider, and that's really important. I also just want to make sure because I kind of, talked about depression and a depressive disorder. I'm not limiting it to that at all. I'm talking, feelings of being anxious can't get you disability. You have to have an anxiety disorder. I see a question that just came through, which kind of fits it with exactly what I'm talking about right now. So I'll address it as we go. The question is, what type of documentation proves the diagnosis? You should be receiving care from a nurse practitioner, a doctor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, but um, hopefully somebody who is a mental health specialist, although even just a primary care doctor for general health conditions is qualified to give a diagnosis, but specifically with a mental health disorder, it really would help you if you have a full a full mental health, psychological, or psychiatric evaluation done. Doesn't necessarily need to be, you know, some long full day study, but certainly at least an intake with a qualified medical provider who has gone through the acceptable, or, what the symptom list for a qualifying diagnosis. And has screened you for that and written up, why they believe that you have that diagnosis. Um, as I'm going to kind of talk about later on in the presentation, though, I want to make sure that I don't put too much emphasis on the importance of a diagnosis without kind of counterbalancing that and make sure that you understand less important than a diagnosis is how it impacts you. So, yes, you do need to have a diagnosis of a major depressive disorder, a generalized anxiety disorder, any type of health issue. The diagnosis is important and it does need to be appropriately diagnosed. But what's more important is that you have a treatment record which explains how that diagnosis is limiting or impacting your functioning. Because a diagnosis alone won't qualify you for Social Security disability benefits. There's only a very few conditions where just having a diagnosis is good enough for them to award you a check. And I'm talking about very serious terminal conditions. You need to have you should have documentation in your records of how that diagnosis is limiting your functioning. So because have a major depressive disorder, I can't focus, I can't concentrate, I struggle to, have even routine interactions with people who are familiar to me. This is important, and I do want to talk on this. Thank you for this question. Is a therapist enough, or does it have to come from a psychiatrist? A therapist is not an acceptable medical source under Social Security's rules. So, if your diagnosis of a mental health disorder comes from a caseworker, a therapist, if it comes from a hospital social worker, that is not enough. It does have to come from one of those sources that I spelled out earlier. The types of medical professionals that are qualified to give a mental health diagnosis to be considered a severe impairment in a Social Security case is a medical doctor, a DO, a PsyD, so a doctor of psychiatry is what I guess that is, a nurse practitioner or a PA, as well as a psychologist, the PhD. Um, you have to have a diagnosis from one of those for Social Security to consider it a valid diagnosis. A therapist can contribute treatment notes that support a mental health diagnosis, but their opinion that you have major depressive disorder won't be considered a severe impairment unless there's also a qualified diagnosis from what Social Security calls an acceptable medical source. So that's the second prong of what is Social Security disability. And then the third piece to this definition is the durational requirement. Okay. And pretty much most mental health impairments are going to qualify here. But um, in order for Social Security to consider something to be a severe impairment and potentially qualify for disability benefits, the impairment has to either be expected to result in death or last for a continuous period of not less than 12 months. Okay. Where this really comes into play is say you have a really bad car accident and you fracture your tailbone and you are really, really messed up from this accident and you're going to be out of work for 8 months. Not good enough for Social Security disability. In order to receive Social Security disability, you have to be unable to work for at least 12 months or more, or have an impairment like a terminal condition, which is expected to result in death in a sooner fashion than that. So that's the third prong to this disability definition. Um, Next slide, Jordan. Great. I'm going to edit these numbers as I go through here because, and I apologize for this. This was borrowed from an older chart that the marketing staff in our office got a hold of. This is the correct process. It's just I want you to ignore the denial rates and approval rates that's on here because they changes every year. So I want to give you the best data that's there. As some of you may have experience with, the thing to understand is that this is a very challenging process. The process of being approved for Social Security disability is a journey, and I do think that that's a fair way of characterizing it. A typical Social Security disability case takes between 18 months and 2 years because it is a process of denials and appeals. Social Security denies most people who apply for these benefits, not because you're not disabled, but because, frankly, they want you to give up and go away. This is an insurance program. And in fact, the formal name for these benefits is Social Security Disability Insurance. And that's how they operate this system. It's about maximizing what's coming in and minimizing what's going out. Now, Social Security is not trying to turn a profit. And if you've watched the news at all in the last 4 months in particular, you'll know that they're not turning a profit on this. But they do at least need there to be as much money coming in to pay for people as there is going out. So that's basically why they have this challenging system set up to receive disability benefits. And let me kind of talk you through the life of a Social Security disability case. The disability journey begins with an initial application, which you can file the application online. You can file it in person in a Social Security office, but now you do need an appointment to do that, or you need it, or it's got to be a phone call. You can do it. You can do it over the phone with Social Security. Um, once Social Security takes the application, they begin collecting medical records from you. They'll send you some forms to fill out about your work history, as well as about your daily functioning. And then they have their own internal doctors review it to see if you are potentially qualified to receive the benefits. It takes them a really long time to review the application. Typically, it takes Social Security about 8 months on average to process an initial application. And as you can see here in this, the denial rate, it's not too far off. About two out of every three disability applications are denied. So if you apply for disability benefits and you do get turned down, uh, do not panic. The odds were stacked against you from the beginning here. Okay. 2/3 of people get denied when they first apply. Don't give up. What you then need to do is file an appeal, which is called a request for reconsideration. The reconsideration is basically the same process. Social Security will get updated medical records. They'll consider the reasons that you disagree with the first denial, although they don't provide you a strong narrative for why they denied you to begin with. And then they take another look and decide if they think that you qualify for the benefits. That denial rate is accurate. That stands the test of time. About 90% of people get denied at the reconsideration appeal. If you do get denied a second time, don't panic. You file another appeal. It's called a request for a hearing with an administrative law judge. The approval rate is a little bit higher than now than it's here on this slide. Right now, nationally, the average approval rate, it's about 53% of claims are actually approved. But as you can tell, as you kind of work your way through the process, people's best chance of being approved for disability benefits is not at the initial application stage or at the reconsideration stage. It's the key is you need to keep filing these appeals and get your case heard by a judge where historically you actually have a better chance than not of being approved for the disability benefits. And but this is a slow process. I told you how the initial application stage takes about 8 months is roughly the average that we're seeing across the office right now. The reconsideration usually moves a little bit quicker, like 6 or 7 months, and the average wait time for a hearing is another, 6 to 12 months, depending on which judge your case gets assigned to. These are really slow cases. So that's how you get to that 2 year, roughly average, 18 months to 2 year average of how long a disability case takes. There are additional reviews that occur even after an ALJ denial. There's an appeals council review. There's one appeals council for the entire United States. You also can file a disability claim into federal district court all the way up through the Supreme Court of the United States, although that's very rare, maybe like one case a year gets heard that relates to disability before the United States Supreme Court. And that's never an issue of is John Doe disabled? It's a public policy issue. It has something to do with the overall process. So it's not just hearing an individual person's disability case if you're going to make it to the highest levels of the United States judicial system. But what's really important to know about the appeals after an ALJ denial is that the standard of review is different. What they're looking at the Appeals Council and in federal district court is not whether the individual applying is disabled. They're looking to see if there was harmful error in the judge's decision. Did they not consider all parts of the law that need to be considered? Did they misstate material facts in the record? So really, there has to be legal error in the decision. It's less about is the person disabled. Okay. So that's kind of the disability process in a nutshell. And that's really, why we're engaged with this because most people do get turned down at first. Just so we assist people with this process as early as the application itself. But certainly if you've been turned down for disability, that's when you definitely want to consider retaining an attorney to help you through this process because this is what we do. We just help people put their best foot forward. So that's kind of the process. Jordan, you want to go on to the next slide? And now, the rest of the time that I have before I turn it over to Jordan to talk to you about, her role a little more in the office, I want to talk to you about what are the key factors in a successful Social Security disability claim? Okay. The first thing that I found, and this is if you're applying for disability benefits, these are the things that I think you should be doing to maximize and give yourself the best chance of being approved. First, having a positive relationship with your medical or therapy providers. Why? Why is that so important? People don't get approved for disability because of what's actually wrong with them. They get approved for disability because of what they can prove is wrong with them through their medical records. And having a strong relationship with your medical provider is kind of the bedrock to that. It's the most important thing, right? Especially if you're somebody who is applying for disability with a severe mental impairment, making sure that you have strong treatment notes is going to be the key to actually being awarded disability benefits. But if you have a therapist, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, somebody who's treating you that you're not comfortable talking to, somebody who you don't trust, somebody who you can't really explain what's wrong with you and how you're limited, then you're not going to have the records that it takes to be successful because you are going to be holding things in. And that's something that I find with a lot of our clients who have very serious mental health issues is that even though, you know, I communicate with them and I can just tell that they're really struggling, maybe they have a doctor or a therapist who they're not comfortable with. So when they sit down for their appointment with them, they're really not shedding their most inner thoughts. They're not telling them what's wrong with them, how they're functionally limited, why they're struggling. And when that's happening, then their provider isn't given the information, it isn't documenting for them what's wrong and why they can't work. So making sure that you have a strong relationship with your provider is so important. A lot of people ask me, well, I want to switch to a different doctor. I want to switch to a different therapist, but won't Social Security think I'm just shopping? No. It is totally normal for somebody to switch to a different provider to find somebody who they're comfortable with. That doesn't mean, if what is a problem is when somebody is shopping around and they're just like, I need more meds, I need more meds. If they think that you're hunting for something that you shouldn't be given, that because you're just trying to find somebody who you're comfortable communicating with, that's totally normal. And I think you would be foolish not to find somebody who you are comfortable, really telling what's going on, because you are going to be relying on that person and their treatment notes to help show Social Security why you can't work, which plays very well into the next thing that it says there, which is communicating your daily limitations to a provider. Your doctor knowing what's wrong with you, your therapist knowing what's wrong with you, will not win your case. What wins your case is you having a doctor or therapist who is writing down what's wrong with you. How do you make sure that that happens? You make sure that that happens by consistently reporting it to them. Telling your doctor once about how you feel, but not bringing up these same things over and over and over again um, is just a recipe for a challenging case. You want to make sure that every single time you have an appointment with any of your medical providers, you are reminding them about all of the daily symptoms that you have. Difficulty communicating with others, difficulty focusing, whatever it might be that are impacting your ability to work. Now, you're not going to be just showing up and telling them about, the difficulty that you're having working necessarily, because I would say most people who are applying for and certainly receiving disability benefits aren't working. That's why they're applying. So, talking about how you're limited and how you're struggling in your day-to-day life, how you're struggling at the grocery store to interact with the cashier, how you are struggling to get out of bed at all, is going to be so important to building this picture for Social Security of a complete inability to work on a full-time basis. Okay. So important that you have a strong relationship, and that once you have that strong relationship, you are using it to really build your case through open and honest communication with that provider. Okay. Next thing, conscientious form filling. I talked about how one big part of this process is that Social Security will send some forms to fill out. I hate sounding like such a, what's the phrase, negative Nelly or something like that. But what I want you to understand is that Social Security does not send you forms to fill out because they are looking to approve your claim. They're not sending you these forms because they want to hear from you why you can't work, and they're just going to take your word for it. Frankly, in the forms that Social Security sends out, in the function reports, in the third party reports that they might ask you to have filled out, they are looking for holes that they can poke in your case. So when they ask you on one of the forms that they send out, do you engage in meal preparation? Almost everybody has to engage in meal preparation. There's very few people who are living in a way where, they have somebody else who is providing them 3 meals a day. But what Social Security needs to understand, so you are responsible for explaining to them, is how meal preparation for you is, uh, you know, maybe you need to, you're just preparing television dinners, heat up meals, lean cuisines, or something like that, because you can't engage in extended cooking. Maybe it means that the most that you're doing is making a bowl of cereal. Something that a lot of my clients with different types of impairments tell me is they say that they batch cook. So once a month or however often they feel well enough, they will do just a ton of cooking, and then they'll freeze it. And the reason is because they don't know the next time that they're going to feel well enough mentally, physically, whatever it might be, in order to sit down and or stand up and prepare a meal. So understanding that when Social Security is asking you questions on the paperwork that they send out, it's not being filled out where you can just, because they want to take your information, help you. They're looking to poke holes in your case. That should be in the back of your mind when you're filling out these forms. Um, I have they're old, although I think we just reshot them. There's videos on YouTube that I shot like 10 years ago at this point, which kind of go through question by question the forms on, the forms that Social Security sends. If you just type in, I mean, if you're in Northeast Ohio, just because of GeoTracks, if you type in Social Security function report in the first search or two, first result or two will be a picture of me. And you'll see me going through how to fill out a function report, a third party report, a work history report. That's really good because I'm just giving like tips that you should have in the back of your mind. But really, the most general tip that I'll give, which at least it's a good takeaway for you today, is when Social Security on the paperwork that they send says to you something like, "Do you engage, do you do meal preparation?" Don't just say yes. Revert the question, or change it in your mind to them asking you, how do your limitations affect your ability to prepare meals? So transform that question because the answers are totally different. How do your limitations affect your ability to prepare meals? Leads you down the path of answering the question the way that I just gave you. Well, I batch cook, or to me, meal preparation just means I'm going to, pour a bowl of cereal because that's the most that I can do. Okay. Next tip, adhere to deadlines. If Social Security sends you something to fill out, fill it out as soon as you can. Get it right back to them. If they deny your case, you have 60 days to file an appeal. You don't want to have to restart the process. That's something that people fall in this trap all the time. They get the denial, maybe they feel really down about it, so they just kind of put off filing the appeal for a little bit. Don't do that. Be engaged with your case. Any attorney that you hire, if you choose to, should be able to stay on top of that for you. Just making sure that you keep your case moving so that you don't have to kind of go back to the beginning. That's the worst case scenario. It takes long enough, even when you're filing appeals right on schedule. It's a nightmare if you have to restart the whole process. You basically lose a year of time or more, depending on when it is. Next thing, understand what Social Security's definition of disability is. And that kind of goes back to that first slide a little bit where I spelled out Social Security's unique definition for disability. Disability is defined differently by just about every government body you can imagine. The VA has their own standard for disability. The Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation has their own standard for disability. The RTA with their bus passes has their own standard for what that means. Know what Social Security's definition of disability is. You need to prove that you are going to be unable to work in a full-time capacity for at least 12 months or more because of a physical or mental health condition. It's basically what it boils down to. Don't get bogged down in other definitions of disability. Okay. Um, Next, patience and understanding kind of goes back to that long wait time. Like I said, an average case takes a really long time. They're not targeting you. Unfortunately, Social Security, I believe, is getting worse with moving cases, even though they are trying to be more efficient. That's kind of the key buzzword that we're hearing from Social Security the last several months. It actually seems like things are going slower than they used to, which isn't surprising the way that they're laying off so much staff. But just understanding that this is a process, that it does take time, um, just kind of managing your expectations of things on the front end is often very helpful to kind of getting across the finish line and seeing the process through. And then the last tip that I think is just so important, especially in mental health cases, abstinence from drugs and alcohol. Why? Because it's a chicken and the egg game when there's drugs and alcohol involved in a Social Security case. Um, Social Security has done kind of a 180 on how they view DA&A in disability cases. If you go back to the early 90s and earlier, you could literally get Social Security disability benefits because you had an addiction of some sort. Today, it doesn't necessarily preclude you from getting disability benefits if you have an addiction and you have a mental health impairment. However, you have to be able to demonstrate through your medical records that you would continue to be disabled even in the absence of the drug or alcohol issue that you have, which creates this really, really cloudy situation. And a lot of times, unfortunately, when Social Security can't tell if somebody is disabled, if they're having mental health issues because they're using substances, or they're using substances because they have mental health issues, right? It's this big nasty cycle, like the chicken and the egg game. The tie doesn't go to the claimant more often than not. If you are leaving the question of whether you are engaged in substances because of your mental health issue to a judge who only approves 15% of the cases that they look at, it's not going to play out very well for you. The best thing that you can do is be sober, be abstinent, so that there's no question that those ongoing mental health challenges that you have, um, they are certainly not the result of any type of drugs or alcohol. And then the last thing that was kind of wrapped into this, but it should stand on its own a little bit as well, specialist care. Going back to what I was talking about earlier. Yes, a primary care doctor can diagnose a mental health impairment. However, if you want to have the type of documentation that it takes to really show Social Security that there's no work at all that you're capable of, I would recommend that you're seeing a psychiatrist, that you're seeing a psychologist, a therapist, even though it's not an acceptable medical source for a diagnosis, it still is a really great source to provide ongoing care and catch-ups in between appointments. A therapist just has more time with you. You know, most people when they go to their doctor who's prescribing their medications, their appointment might be limited to 15 minutes, 10 minutes, depending on the office. There's not a whole lot of time. Sometimes those appointments are once a month. Sometimes they're only every 3 months, depending on who it is that you're seeing. But if you have, you know, a therapist or a caseworker, somebody who is at least documenting what your day-to-day life is like in light of your mental health challenges, even though their diagnosis won't be considered valid by Social Security, their notes about your daily functioning do have to be considered. So still really helpful treatment there. Um, those are just some big tips. I'm sure that your questions will kind of uncover some additional tips as well. But Jordan, if you want to move on, I think this turns it over to you, right?
Yeah, yeah. And while you were talking, Michael, a few questions did come in the chat um, that go
Do you
back
want me
to
to
the
answer those
previous
now?
slide. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
here, I can answer them now. Here,
a
let's see
couple
here.
more are coming in. Yep.
Let's see. What are the detractors to applying for or receiving SSDI? My son has suffered over OCD over the years, yet only recently began treatment with a counselor. Does he have to wait to apply until he's been in therapy for 12 months? Great questions. Um, I don't know of any downside to applying for SSD benefits. There's no cost to apply. You don't need to retain an attorney. Even if you do, an attorney would be working on contingency, so they would only get paid if you're approved for disability benefits. So I'm really not sure what the downside is. There isn't a scarlet letter that comes along with this. That's a concern that a lot of people have is, oh, I don't want to be marked as disabled and then I'm caught in the system. It's just not how it works. Um, but the second part of your question is something that I definitely want to talk about. You don't have to be out of work for 12 months or have uh, been necessarily even in therapy 12 months to be considered disabled. You just have to have an impairment that is expected to last at a disabling level for 12 months. So that's not the same thing. And if anybody needs me to follow up and try and explain that another way or in a deeper way, I would be glad to try. But especially that second part, no, you don't need to be out of work for 12 months. You just have to have an impairment that's expected to keep you from working full time for 12 months. Let's see. So the form allows space for folks to elaborate limitations on their ability to prepare meals. Yes, at the end, they do allow you to elaborate. It's on the very last page of the form. A lot of people don't use that uh, part of the form to do that. They should, though. And then you have to be on SSDI or SSI to be considered disabled for tax purposes. No, one has nothing to do with the other. Maybe you have a private pension that will accept uh, if you know there certainly are circumstances where I've seen where like I think the Ford pension program, if you are like Ford, the motor company, if you are deemed disabled by Social Security, you're allowed to tap into your retirement earlier without a penalty. But that's an individual thing. That's not really a Social Security question. That's more dependent on the specific IRA or pension that you would be asking about. So I think that that kind of addresses the questions that are there, Jordan. I'm sure more will come up before the end of the hour.
Great. All right. Great questions coming in. So yeah, this is my portion. As I stated at the beginning, I'm the client concierge at Liner Legal. This program began 5 years ago when Michael was receiving questions from our clients of, hey, how am I supposed to pay my bills during this process of not being able to work? How can I get my basic needs met? I need food, I need shampoo and laundry soap. And so I joined the firm 5 years ago, and um, so how I come in contact with our clients is I'm one of the first people to reach out to them. Once a client becomes our client, I'll send them a welcome email. I have a video on YouTube that just kind of explains how I can assist them. So I get all kinds of questions from clients that are struggling in many ways. As I stated, food is a very big question that I get. And what I'll do is wherever they live, as Michael stated, we are a nationwide firm now. So we have clients in every state. So no matter where they're located, I'll do a search to see what might be available in their county, different food pantries, food banks, hot meals, things like that. Um, Food is probably the number one question I get asked about. I also get asked about bills in general. How can I keep up with my bills? And so I will oftentimes link them with a budgeting program for their utilities, such as HEAP. And in every county is a little specific. Now that we've grown nationwide, it's really interesting to see how the states compare of what they offer. And so I'll just dig around and see what I can find. Um, no question is out of reach. I've been asked all kinds of things of how people need to get by during this time. So, as I mentioned, food is definitely number one. For transportation resources, if someone is not connected with Medicaid for their health insurance, there is the program to help transportation to and from doctor's appointments. Many of our clients don't know about that or they're not connected with Medicaid. So I'll often start with that, ask them if they have health insurance so that they can get treated during this time. So I'll send them information on how to apply for Medicaid. I can look up free clinics if maybe they don't qualify for Medicaid. Again, state by state. So I'll talk with them about Medicaid transportation, um, utility assistance. As I mentioned, each state is a little bit different on what is offered for that. Making sure that they have access to go to the doctor. And housing assistance is a very big question as well. I am noticing that many of the rental assistance programs that were booming 5 years ago and had all kinds of funding are now unfortunately dwindling down. So I sometimes have to let folks know that the local county program has ended. I don't give up there. Oftentimes, local churches can assist with one-time payments. Salvation Army, Catholic Charities, those are nationwide. Programs can have often stepped up during the time of, maybe the county program is just not offering something. So um, I'll really try to think outside of the box when a client comes to me and asks for help. Um, but I'm kind of at the mercy of what the county is offering at the same time, but I will do everything in my power to see what we can find and what might be available for them. I did see a question come in that I want. Do you have to be a client? Yes. So once a client is signed with us, they are a part of our law firm, and that's when I can assist them. Um, I have brainstormed with, if a client is already linked with case management and already seeing services through their local mental health agencies, I can also work with them just to kind of brainstorm ideas. Um, but yeah, we would I do work just with clients who are our clients. Any other questions about the client concierge program? Did I miss anything, Michael? I don't think
I
so.
don't think so. Let's see. All right, we got some more questions coming in. 3 months ago, my son had a job in health insurance. He lost job, was hospitalized, diagnosed with schizophrenia, was denied Medicaid because he has savings. Does he have any other options for health insurance? You may be able to look and see if he's eligible for COBRA or just through the general exchange. If you are awarded Social Security disability benefits, then you do receive Medicare, but not until 29 months after the onset of disability, which is basically when I assume when he would have been hospitalized. So in the short term, it sounds like his best option is maybe looking to seeing if there's a Cobra option or if he could buy something inexpensive through just a general exchange.
Through the,
And
yeah,
then,
oftentimes if clients ask us about questions very similar to that, I'll refer them to the marketplace. There are very similar marketplace programs that are very similar to Medicaid. And so low cost. So that could definitely be an option. He could also get treated with no insurance at a local free clinic that will accept anyone that doesn't necessarily need to have insurance.
next question that I'm seeing coming through here is I'm wondering how savings affects this process. So there's two types of Social Security benefits. One is called Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI. It is based on your work history and having paid into Social Security. You can have unlimited savings and still be eligible to receive SSDI benefits. Could be the richest person in the world if you can't work and earn more than $1,620 per month. Now, it's a good clarification statement here. Doesn't matter how much is in the bank, it just matters how much money you are earning from work activity. But as long as you are under that amount, you can receive disability benefits. It is something that is earned by working and paying into Social Security. The flip side, so savings don't matter. With SSI benefits, supplemental security income, it is a needs-based benefit based on being unable to work. And why that's really critical distinction is when I say the needs-based, it's for people who have very low resources and income. And absolutely, savings do matter. And they are pitifully low. If you have more than $2,000 in savings for a single individual, $3,000 if you're a part of a married couple, then Social Security will automatically find that you don't meet the technical requirements to receive SSI benefits. So savings can affect SSI, which is not based on your work history. You never needed to have worked a day in your life, but you still have to prove that you can't work, but no impact for SSD benefits. Next question. My client lost her Social Security because she had assets that she technically did not have. A house was left to her and her sisters that her sisters took from her. What can we do? She's got to get her name off that house if she doesn't own a piece of it. So because of the limited, um, because SSI has uh, asset and resource limitations on it, you actually can own one home and still qualify, but you need to live in that home. I'm assuming based on the fact that she lost benefits, what happens was she is residing somewhere. She inherited this house. Social Security assumes that 1/3 of that house is hers, but she's not living in it. And so they will deem 1/3 of the value of that home to her and consider that her resource. So, really, what she needs to do is untangle that with her sisters, get her name off the house, and then she could resume receiving payments. Thank you for that question. Look at that handsome guy there. Talking about you, Matt. All
Uh,
right. Do we have any other
okay.
questions?
It isn't listed on this last page, but please check us out on all of our social media platforms. We have a very thriving YouTube channel with a lot of great content that Michael has done. Um, and feel free to pass those along to your clients or your family members or friends. We're on all social media platforms with really great, helpful information.
Yeah, I post 3 videos every single day on TikTok if you're on TikTok. The Backwards Hat Barrister, but you could just search my name, Michael Liner, and you can find me there. But I am answering common questions like this all day long, video recording it and throwing it up there. So check me out and say hi.
It looks like one question came in for me. What options are there for permanent supported housing? So, in situations like that, I really lean on a local case manager if the client is connected. A lot of the times for supportive housing, they'll want a referral directly from a mental health agency such as Signature Health or um, Crossroads Health, they'll want a direct referral. So I don't work entirely close with supportive housing. I will help a client if they're in the beginning stages of wanting to get on a housing wait list for public housing, Section 8, the housing choice voucher. I'll point them in that direction. But a lot of the specific permanent supportive housing or group home settings I really lean on the case managers for help with that. So if they're not connected with a case manager already, I can help them with the process of getting connected with a mental health agency. But if they are already connected and have a case manager, I'm happy to talk with that person so that we can brainstorm different ideas and include that person on in the case with us.
There was also a question about how does it, if you're in school, how does that affect the process? Does that impact the process of applying for SSDI?
Matt, your sound, it's not
Oh,
coming through clearly.
sorry, I have a fan on. I just turned it off.
Oh
There was
yeah,
a
now I hear you.
there was a question in there about if you're in school while applying
Oh,
for SSDI.
okay, sorry I missed that. Um, so here's where I step in and say there's the way that the law is written and there's the way that the law is applied. School isn't earnings. Technically, it is not, there's nothing that is an automatic disqualifier for being in school while applying for or receiving disability benefits. But I always want to caution people. If somebody, and I don't know, if you're just taking one class, you're doing it from home remotely, you're doing it on your own time, like you can pace it yourself because it's like virtual class might not have that much of an impact. If you are going to Tri-C and you're taking 15 credit hours, and the way that it usually boils down is they assume that there's, 1 or 2 hours of home study time for every 1 hour of coursework that you're doing. Social Security might say, well, if you're able to be a full-time student, why would you be unable to do a simple job, repetitive in a sedentary sit down fashion for 40 hours per week if you're able to focus, concentrate, sit in a chair and do school activities for a similar amount of time. So that's where I just caution people. There's the way that the law is written, but then there's the way that the law is applied, and you kind of proceed at your own risk. I've been told people with a higher education are less likely to get approved for Social Security. Is there any truth to that? Um, Not much. No. I mean, I just saw numbers that were released which show there's maybe a overall 1% difference in the likely in the outcome of cases between people with above high school educations and people with less than eighth grade educations. Um, Last question, can you explain SSD versus SSI? And can a person apply for both to receive more money? Yes, you can apply for both, first of all. It's called concurrent claims, but you might not be eligible for both because SSI only pays what's called the federal benefit rate, the FBR. This year, it's $967 per month. If you are receiving more than that in SSD benefits, then you don't have any eligibility remaining for SSI benefits because for every dollar that you have coming in from another resource, including SSD benefits, they take $1 off of your SSI payment. So you could only get both if your SSD payment was under $967, and SSI might be bringing you up to that amount. And then just kind of very generally, SSI, both programs in terms of what you have to demonstrate, how disabled you are, exactly the same. So in terms of the medical records and what Social Security is looking for, there's no difference there. Where it's different is in the non-medical requirements. SSI, you don't ever have to have worked a day in your life. It is based on having limited income and resources. However, you have to fall below the federal poverty guidelines. And that's why I said you can't have more than $2,000 in resources for a single individual, 2,000 for a single individual, 3,000 if you're a part of a married couple. SSD benefits, on the other hand, it's based on your work history. While you are working, you are paying into Social Security in case you become unable to work. That's where part of your taxes go towards. And generally speaking, you have to have worked and paid into Social Security for 5 of the 10 years immediately prior to becoming disabled in order to receive SSD benefits. Your payment amount is based on how much you paid in taxes over the years. So the longer you worked, the higher that you were earning. So the more taxes you were paying, the higher your benefit amount is. Great.
Like,
Neat.
that's the last question. Just want to remind everyone to also complete the survey for this presentation. I just put the link in there, and you can select the, I believe the description is psychoeducation/educational session for the type of program that you participated in today. So, and again, I will send the slides and the link to the survey in an email momentarily, and had a couple people asking about the recording. It will be uploaded to our NAMI Greater Cleveland channel on YouTube sometime later this week. Okay. Thank you, Jordan and Michael, for doing this for us, and thank you all
Thank you.
for joining us, bringing a lot of good questions, and hope everyone has a great week. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you for
Matt.
having
Good
Thank
me.
seeing
you.
you as always.
Bye-bye.